Da 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 da. All right, so the next one we have is we have a group. Don't call it a panel. We got questions and answers. We're gonna get some people up here. Gonna introduce them very poorly, very briefly. You know, we're gonna have a little conversation. You can help get the chairs. You don't have to just watch me do this. I don't know. I guess in a row. Yeah, in a row. That probably makes the most sense. So if you take the first chair. I'm going to ask you the question first. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. Take the second chair. Yeah, this is perfect. And then Vincent. That's the order I have the notes written in. I have the notes written in this order. Otherwise, I'd get it wrong. All right, Tobes, make sure that works.
Does it work? It works.
Does it work? All right. So on stage, in order, we have Tobes, who is an information architect at Google. We have Denise, who is a user researcher here at ADP. We have Misha, who is an independent jack of all things that you need done to things that are broken, including some mechanical knowledge. And Vincent, who is director? VP, excuse me, of user experience at Roken. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to be asking them some questions that were prepared ahead of time. It's a chance for them and you to sort of maybe learn something, get some opinions, not exactly learning. So the first question is one that comes up a lot in at least my work and perhaps theirs as well. And that question is, in a design conflict, who solves it? Who solves conflicts? Where can you find the best answers? Tobes?
That is a very good question. So, so this is the moment where I wish I would have taken notes when you sent that email with those questions. I personally run into that problem quite often, right? There's no good answer to this in my experience. It usually, like in the end, seniority trumps opinion, right? In an ideal world, data trumps opinion. So in my experience, the best thing to do if you have like a disagreement about what to do or what the ultimate decision should be, get data. Get like data from users, get data from your log files. A lot of design conversations are around, I think we should do this. I'm the most senior person in the room, so we should do this. And all of that is just based on assumption of, you know, if people even consider who the users are or who the audience is. There's a lot of assumption in there. And as soon as you're able to provide data on like who the people are that we actually talk to or like how things work for them, that usually ends most discussions. Like not all of them, but data trumps opinion in my experience.
I think to some degree it depends, and yes, ultimately seniority can trump data. But I think in my experience, usually if there's a design conflict, it's usually comes from the product teams and not between the researcher and the designer. So I try to make the research not just me delivering research and throwing it over a wall. I actually involve the designer and hopefully product as well, so that if there's a design conflict, I will work with the designer to, because ultimately design should be, you know, everybody has their level of expertise. Design is a discipline, research is a discipline, you know, development comes out of engineering, but to me, I would go first to the designer to figure out a way to, I guess strength is in numbers also. So to really create an alliance to make sure that whether we have to give in to seniority or whether we that we make the best case possible using data, but also making sure that people understand that there's a discipline and expertise behind design decisions.
Thanks. I would agree with most of everything that has been said. The one thing I would add is we've all seen that Venn diagram of user needs, business goals, and technology. And I think in a ideal world, data, the way Tobias was talking about, and thoughtful design would always rule the day. And so when you say best source, that's what I would answer. I would get in a real world, there's also what the company is trying to do and what it can do.
Yeah, so I think for me, working mostly in client services with external clients and such, what often happens is that there's a design conflict, the client generally just gets to make the call, right? But I think that there's a couple of different things, right? So in an ideal world data and even testing different designs, different iterations, and seeing which wins out is the best way to do it. But I think for us, we always just try to, if there is a conflict, we sort of in our world try to just kind of jam on it together, collaboratively eke out the pros and cons of each. If we can show sort of mock-ups to users who are likely to actually be using the product and have that sort of help spur on what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll just do this. Thank you, everybody. Now we're all right. So the question 2 is very specifically about user testing, user research. There's a lot of styles out there. There's a lot of ways to do it, and there's new technologies, remote testing, surveys. What? Hey, I'm just asking the question. All right. So the question is, what is your favorite type? We're going to start with Denise on this one. Pass it down.
Well, my background is anthropology, so I'm about context. So I know that it's seen as the most expensive kind of research, but I like to go to where people use the products as much as possible. I generally tend to work on products that are for work. So I like to go to people's workplaces. I know that's not always possible. We do have a lab here, and I was trained to work in labs, but to me, a lab is one tool, but to me, it's more not necessarily doing ethnographic research, because that's not, that's not, I'm an anthropologist, but I don't see every problem as the same nail and using the same hammer, but if I had my druthers, if I had the resources, I would always go to where people work.
Yeah, I would also say that contextual research, getting sort of that thick context of people's lived experience and environments and context is crucial. And I would say that within that, the most rewarding for me, and also the most draining, is that research where you're going to try and understand what the problem space is early in the process, or possibly even as part of discovery. I certainly have had projects where in the second or third round of usability testing, we look at each other and we say, we have been answering the wrong question and we need to rethink that. But that is rarer than that moment that you have in somebody's home or somebody's office when you say, hey, what this customer really needs is something we haven't even started thinking about yet. And so that to me is the value of contextual research.
Yeah, contextual research is awesome. It's one of my favorite things to do. I've been lucky enough to do it a few times, and it's just great because you get to really you often unearth stuff that the people who are actually sort of paying you to go in and do things didn't necessarily think about, because they're not the people on the ground. They're not the people who have the problems. All they know is there's an issue and we need to improve it. But how do you improve it? That's by seeing what the pain points are. And as for testing, I mean, that's a different beast, because a lot of the times testing can be tough if it's, I guess, pre-launch, because, the context of them using it, it's not the day-to-day, it's not when they're actually going to be using it once it's gone live. So it's there's different ways you can kind of get around that, but it's tough. And there's fun ways to do it. Like I've been lucky enough to work on site for some of my clients where I've like, for example, it's a cultural institution I did some work for, and we were able to just kind of go into the lobby and just pull people aside and show them things and quick prototypes and have them get really engaged in doing that. And so that was really, really, really helpful as well.
I think as Denise said, it's not like this hammer, like everything has to look like a nail. I think it very strongly depends on the type of project that you work on and the needs of the project. What kind of user research and user testing makes sense. I also always, like in my experience, it's really important to set up your research and your testing really well. Like, what are the questions that you want to address? How do I recruit my people? What's the profile of like the subjects? To know exactly what you want to get out of the research, because if people question the outcome of or the data, it's very important to be solid on like, how did you test? What was the methodology? Does the data really suggest what you say it suggests, right? It's very easy to, like, for, I don't know, project managers or whatever who have a business case in mind to dismiss user finding, because like it's very easy to just say it was just that one person, or everyone you cast was like in their mid-20s, but our audience is in the mid-30s or whatever. Having said that, you know, if you have the opportunity to work in a very small team, there's a thing called the RITE methodology, RITE, Rapid Iterative Testing and Evaluation. I had the opportunity to do that on a project I worked on with a fairly small team, with a researcher who had come over. I think it originates from Microsoft, and she had come over from Microsoft. And that is, you do a week, you do a prototype, you spend a day putting the prototype together, and then you test it for half a day. Then you evaluate your results as a small team, and then you address the problems that you agreed that you saw, change the prototype, test the next day. It's super intense. The developer who will put together the prototype will like lose 10 years of their life expectancy in just that week. But it's super insightful, and it's I think you guys said that too. It's like there's nothing like watching a user experience what you put together, right? In that week, I've seen engineers like scream at the like that one-way window because a user wouldn't find the button that we were so sure they would find it. So yeah, right testing is for me was a really good experience when we had the opportunity to do that.
So Tobes, yeah, what I like about this is yours was. Have you done anthropological style testing before? Like sitting in an office, watching somebody work, doing observational?
No, I have not.
Yeah. Have you ever wanted to?
Yes.
Why do you want to? Because I mean, I'm going to kind of switch up the question. There was a third question that was a little bit different, but I think there's something good in here. You've expressed a desire for it. Vincent said like you've only been able to do it a couple of times, and it was super valuable. And like there's this question, right? This goes back to like, how do we sell that thing we want to do? Because it has business value, but the business doesn't always see it. They see it as something long-term, expensive. Maybe, I don't know how they see it. I just get afraid of asking for it. I mean, so for you, what do you think, like, have you never tried to pitch it, or what's kept you from doing it? And for the rest of you, it's that sort of question, like, if you've experienced it, you have a sense of its value, what do you think keeps it from happening?
I'm just gonna try and answer that first. Well, I think, I mean, the challenge with selling user testing is always like the time and the budget, right? It takes some time and it takes some budget. If you want to do it right, you need, you know, either equipment, or there's ways like Silverback where, you know, you need a software license for $35 and then you're set up. But if you want to do it right, you know, you need to factor it into your roadmap. You have to respond to what you find, otherwise there's no point in doing it. So I think that's like the main challenges of getting user testing as part of your project setup. And I think you have to do it really, you know, you have to try and get it on the map really early on before you even start working on your project, so that people have the right expectations, right? Because everyone wants to launch tomorrow.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I think for me, it's like you said, time and budget is the big factor in determining whether you're going to be able to do it or not. And you know, clients a lot of times they say, well, we have to get this up by date X, or else, you know, it's just not going to happen. And that's often the case. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be able to find a client that buys into your expertise and your knowledge that, look, if we do these things, what you end up with is going to be better, and it's going to better service the people you're trying to service, whether it's consumer facing or employee facing or what have you, then that's awesome, and that's, you know, that's a dream, right? But you know, we try to sell it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that's just kind of the nature of business, right? It's all money driven.
I mean, it's almost a vicious cycle, because the best way to sell user research is to have examples of wins from user research driven projects. So if you don't have those for yourself and you have to rely on outside projects, and you don't have that sort of authority of personal expertise, and it can be hard to get started with that. But if you come in and that's part of your story from early on, as sort of the special sauce that you provide is not just use. I'm just going to pick on you a little bit, Tobias. You were saying user testing, and I think talking about it as user testing is a different thing than going out and saying we're going to do research to validate that just this idea is the right thing, as opposed to testing the product while we're making it. And sort of trying to get people invested in this idea. It's also getting the client out into the field to see how their stuff is used, whether it's an internal client or an external client, can be an extremely valuable thing for you in terms of building that relationship. So that's something to think about as you're creating your plan. But I think also you want to look for what else is there in my tool set that I can use in these cases. Because sometimes you will have a client who is like, I will pay you whatever it takes, but it absolutely has to launch in September. I spent the last 2 years working as I was a design and technology fellow at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and one site that I launched had to launch in September because this data set was released once a year, and it was really the only time I got any interest from outside of a small community of researchers. And we actually spent a while believing that our release date was congressionally mandated, which is a whole weird thing. And so we're like, okay, we can't do a big research program up front. Who here in the organization has already gone out and talked to the people who are using this data? Who else is using adjacent data sets? How can we bring them in as sort of proxies for the kind of research we would love to do, but we can't? So you're always looking for opportunities to do the sort of research that you know is going to get the right results for your client. But then you're also like rooting around your toolbox, being like, what else can I turn into the screwdriver that I need?
I guess in terms of trying to pitch the research and the research that you think is the most applicable, the most relevant, to steal from Topher Sharon from Google, it's alliances for me, and what I've worked both in consulting and embedded in teams. And first, I think the UX designer has to be a partner. The researcher or the designer, have to be partners in the output, which is the design, and that so that the research is just a process. But I've also worked in places where even the internal UX department has a lot of pushback on what kind of research you do, and allocating resources to research. And you find your alliances where you can. Previously I've made alliances with the clients, and so that the clients were the ones that are pressuring my own department for more research or product, or you find your alliances where you can. So, and hopefully, and you look for the people that are most interested in research, that can help you push through the importance of research and the importance of the research not being an end in and of itself, but part of the overall process of creating a better user experience.
Just to maybe add one point to this, and thanks for picking on me about the difference between user research and user testing, because that's actually that's a great point, right? It depends on where you are in the process, and I think it also depends on your client, as you were saying. Like if they come to you with very specific ask that you just want to cater to, it's much harder to do a lot of upstream research, right? Like the much better scenario is for your client to approach you and tell them, we have a problem here, right? And then you do the research to find out whether the problem is actually the problem they think it is, or whether, like, what are they actually trying to achieve? And research can be like a tremendous instrument in doing that. And then there's, you know, usability testing, if you so want, that comes further down the stream, just to verify whether like what you did is successful. So I agree, like it's much more preferable to do the research up front, and there's not just, you know, that's not just a UX team's or a team's responsibility, right? If you have strategy people on your team or in your organization, that's the people to partner with, right? To set the business goals in the first place, because they should be influenced by, you know, by what your users should try, by a happiness first approach. So the happiness should be in the business goals.
Right. And great allies, I'm just going to quickly, are the marketing team, who are probably doing their own research, even if it's differently focused. And if your organization has an in-house customer service representative group, they hear all the pain points the most.
Anybody else want to make any final comments? You guys good? Yeah? Well, thank you very much. It's great to have you guys up here. I think we have a few minutes. If anybody from the audience wants to ask one of these people, or all of them collectively, a question, now's your opportunity.
For Vincent, how much are you guys advocating research as part of the client process?
We advocate it quite heavily. We always want to have what we call the discovery phase, and in that there's always a good chunk of research, and that research includes obviously interviews with business stakeholders, but also interviews with users or customers or whatever, depending on, you know, whether it's an internal application or external application. It's, you know, I'm a huge proponent of it. I mean, I think obviously at this point, but we really try to push it, and we've had pretty good success. You know, what we try to do is, because our clients will always be fine with us doing stakeholder interviews, and a lot of times what we'll do with that is we'll try to kind of parlay those into, especially if it's an internal facing application, parlay that into, oh, well, maybe, you know, as part of the interview, we can kind of sit and watch you do it. And then it feels like less of an add-on to the client sometimes. It's part of the way you're pitching it. You know, and if it's, let's say, something that we're doing for a client where it's not just purely digital, but also affects kind of the physical, like, I know my company, we did some stuff for Chipotle, right? So we were able to also just kind of go there and do that on our own, sort of just within the time frame that we had this discovery period. So there's different ways to kind of sneak it in there, but we always do try to push for it and explain, you know, this is part of our process. When we're talking to new clients, this is part of our process. This is what we recommend is the best way to get the best result.
So this is for all of you. As you're doing the user research and discovering things, can you talk briefly about your process of synthesis and interpretation? How do you take what you've gotten and draw out of it?
I have the mic, so I'll go first. Not to be a hog, but yeah, no, that's an interesting piece, right? Because you could potentially get a whole bunch of different outcomes or findings from the different people that you talk to or observe or what have you. And I think the way we do it is just really just kind of, we try to be as systematic as possible, right? We kind of boil things down. We try to break them into themes. We kind of, there's there will be outliers and there'll be commonalities, and we try to focus on the commonalities and deconstruct them and think about what they mean as a whole, and then kind of put that together and create sort of like, official findings, if you will. That's really sort of the process that I like to go through.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, because I think our processes are very similar. Post-its on the wall. One sort of insight per post-it. Everybody who is at a given interview speaks to what they saw, because different people are going to see different things. If you have interviews across various regions that are very different, or very different kinds of user types, you can color code or have like a star or something so you can see. And then, sort of tying back to what Abby was saying, you take all of those and you start to recategorize them and you put them up on the wall and you start to see these affinity maps. The great thing is, as you're doing it, people will start to say, hey, what if our product did X or Y? And then you sort of have a whole sandbox just of these ideas that have come up out of it. And then by the end of the day, once you walk through this whole process of reading out and finding themes, you should really have a strong sense of what you've got. And then your challenge in writing up the report is to tie this into what comes next, to tie it into the design principles, to make it, like as you were saying, a set of design recommendations. I had one client who was like, why are we doing this research? I've done all this research and it hasn't changed anything. And I said, well, have you done the synthesis process and made it into something actionable? And he said, and no, they hadn't. They had a whole bunch of very expensive notebooks on their shelves. And if you want to sell people on the value of research, you want to get the value, then you need to think about, how does what we learned out in the field then going to imply certain things in the design studio and be able to articulate that?
Actually, it's interesting that you mentioned the Post-its on the wall, because that's actually my process. Whether I'm with a group where there's actually the privacy of an observation room, or whether I do it by myself, and there's different ways of synthesis. When I was a consultant, you have a couple of weeks to write your report. But when you're embedded within a team, the people want to know what happened the next day, if not the same day. So having, whether they're cards or whether they're Post-its or however you do it, just continuously cataloging everything that you see, and then just writing down everything that you see, and then later on, just whether it's on a wall or stacks of just putting it all together, because you don't, even though I record everything, you don't have time when you're embedded within a team to go back and look at your recordings and think about it and scratch your head, and you have to really be able to do it on the fly. And the best way to do it is to collaborate and have more than just yourself watching, because you're also triangulating the findings, because it's more from more than one perspective, but also it's forcing you to kind of think at a meta level at the same time. So I guess those are our tricks.
All right, sorry, Tobes, we're gonna have to call time on it. We'll have to wait.
Such a good answer.
We'll have to wait for your synthesis answer at another time. You can find him later. There'll be a break soon. But thank you very much, everybody. It was great. Thank you for participating in this questions and answer. I hope it was good for you out there. All right, take your chairs with you. All right. So next up.